Hello, boys and girls. Let's continue with reading, please. Week 2, the history of communication. You could please go to page 311, please. This is the cover page, the history of communication, illustrations by Danny Schlitz. And you can see here, boys and girls, almost like a timeline of the different inventions that have been created, used throughout our history to communicate with one another. If you could now please go to page 312 and 13, please, boys and girls. 312 and 13. What is communication? Communication is the sharing of ideas and information. People can share information through spoken and written words, by making and looking at images, and by making and listening to sounds. People can also communicate through gestures and facial expressions. Over time, people have developed ways to share information with many people at once. Such methods of mass communication have included books, magazines, newspapers, television, radio, and more recently, the internet. Communication also takes place through sound recordings, motion pictures, and signs. Taken together, these tools allow people all over the world to communicate with one another. The printing press. Between 1300 and 1600, a cultural movement called the Renaissance rebirth swept across Europe. The Renaissance was a period of great advancement in educational and artistic ideas, and it created a huge demand for books. Hand copying and block printing could not keep up with this demand. In about 1440, a German inventor named Johannes Gutenberg developed a printing press that used movable type. Gutenberg made separate pieces of metal type for each letter of the alphabet. He assembled the pieces in a frame to form pages and applied ink to the type. The machine pressed the inked type against paper to print words. The Gutenberg press could print about 300 copies a page daily. By 1500, there were more than 1,000 print shops in Europe, and several million books had been produced. Printing quickly became an important communication tool. It significantly increased the production of religious texts. In addition, debates about social problems, religious beliefs, and government matters quickly appeared in print. There were few changes to the printing press from Gutenberg's time until the 1800s. In 1811, a German named Friedrich Koenig invented a steam-powered press that could print about 1,100 sheets per hour. In 1846, Richard Hoe of the United States invented a press that used rotating cylinders, revolving drums, to print 1,000 sheets per hour. Later, models turned out as many as 20,000 sheets per hour. The printing press is one of the most important inventions in history. It has enabled millions of people to receive knowledge through books, newspapers, magazines, and other printed formats. If we look at the photographs, boys and girls, in the captions, it says here, this English engraving shows a steam-driven printing press from 1826. This is Johannes Gutenberg, and caption here, newspapers are printed by the thousands like these copies of the Houston Chronicle. Okay, boys and girls, let's have our discussion. What is communication? Communication is the sharing of ideas and information. When you communicate with someone else, whether you do it in person or not, you're sharing ideas and information. And sometimes it's spoken or written or pictures or sounds. And even some people can communicate with gestures and facial expressions. Let's look at some of those examples, boys and girls. Hand gestures. Here we have several. This hand gesture right here is very happy. Thumbs up. Another thumbs up, everything's okay. This hand gesture means you want to drink, you want some water. This hand gesture says hello, nice to meet you, respect. This hand gesture, boys and girls, is like, well, hold up, wait, right? So in this hand gestures, we're in it together, we're a team. And there's so many hand gestures, boys and girls, that they mean something. And as for facial expressions, we can also communicate with our faces. We don't even have to speak or say anything. Our face sometimes says a lot, boys and girls, as you can see these facial expressions here. And they, over time, they wanted more information. They wanted mass communication through books, magazine, newspapers, television, radio, and recently the internet, boys and girls. But the first way they would communicate with one another was by writing letters and books. And this was during this time, boys and girls, it was an industry, it was a job, it was an invention. And if you remember in our social studies lesson from last week, industry, boys and girls, was a business, a type of work that an item was made and sold. And between the 1300 and 1600, an advancement in education, artistic, and there was a huge demand for books, boys and girls. And the way books were published first, they're hand copied. Someone had to copy the books by hand, but they couldn't produce enough of them because the demand was so high. Block printing is how it was the first way of printing books. And block printing, boys and girls, was they would use tools, and they would use pieces of wood, and they would trace, here's an example, boys and girls. It was invented in China, and a piece of wood, and they would carve into the wood the words, the letters, and by doing that, then they would put ink on top of it and they would press it onto paper. And that's how they first started. Okay. But of course, boys and girls, they couldn't produce enough books that way. It was not fast enough. I remember from social studies it was necessary. Everything needed to be fast and mass produced, a lot of them. And so from there, in about 1440, a German inventor, Johann Gutenberg, invented a a printing press. And that printing press, instead of working with blocks of wood, it worked with metal. And it had lots of little letters, words, and they were lined up together, and they created words and sentences, but these were made out of metal. Every little piece was a different letter, and so someone had to line up all these pieces of metal to create sentences and words and sentences. And once they did that, boys and girls, they were able to apply the ink to it and then put the piece of paper on top and create the page. Again, that's a lot of work, boys and girls, for every single little letter or word to be put there in a correct order and then applied ink to it and printed on paper. That was also a lot of work, boys and girls. And then from there, what was created was, okay, boys and girls, and from the Gutenberg press, they could print about 300 copies a day, but that was still not enough, boys and girls. Millions of books were being produced, so they wanted to make things faster once again. And so in the 1811, a German man named Frederick Coin, he invented a steam-powered press. And this is how it looked like, boys and girls. And this is a steam printing press. A lot of hard work, boys and girls, to print the stories, the books, the newspapers. Lots of hard work. Okay. Then after that, in 1846, Richard Hoe, sorry, hold on. Okay. And then in 1846, Richard Hoe of the United States invented a press that used rotating cylinders, and that was able to produce 8,000 sheets of copies per hour, boys and girls. And this was Richard Hoe, and his machine was this, boys and girls. It says Richard March Hoe, 1812 through 1886. In the 1840s, Richard March Hoe departed from the traditional flatbed printing press. This is how they were printed, boys and girls. Individual pages had to be cut, wasn't happy with that, and joined the race to perfect the rotary printing press. In 1846, his type revolving machine transformed the newspaper industry. He had this idea, different design. And this is the machine, boys and girls. Okay, boys and girls, my question to you is this. Do you think that we're still producing, do you still think there's a high demand for newspapers to be printed and a lot of books to be printed? Or do you think they have been replaced by another technology? What do you think, boys and girls? Do you think we're still printing a lots of newspapers and books as they were in the past? Or do you think because of the new technology we have that less and less people are printing newspaper and buying newspapers? What do you think, boys and girls? Think about it. Thank you, boys and girls.